Hello, and welcome back aboard the USS Pickerel SS-177. You're joining us dockside here in Darwin, Australia on March 11th, 1942, where we've just stopped in for just a handful of hours, topping off our fuel, torpedoes, and sending ashore our 4 prisoners of war that we picked up from a sunken Japanese cruiser.
Yes, sir. Ahead slow. Yes, sir.
I was a little afraid that our guests were going to be a bit of a security problem, but it turns out once they got a taste of our food on board the ship, they couldn't get enough of it, and they were more than happy to be well behaved. They even pitched in with cleaning here and there, and ended up not being any issue at all. So we offloaded them here in Darwin. I want to get turned around, get back out to sea now. We've got one more objective that I want to get done before we head to the barn for real and cap off this this patrol. Very busy patrol so far. So we're gonna do that now. Let's get underway and head back up into the Java Sea. Well, well, we've got a contact here in the Flores Sea, just south of the island of Celebes. We haven't even made it back to the Java Sea or our target area yet, but here is a Japanese merchant just off our port side. Pretty close, too. This must be a pretty dark night because the lookouts did not spot this target until right now. And look, she's, I don't know, maybe 3 miles away. Awfully close. And looking like maybe she's paralleling us or maybe closing, maybe cutting in front of us. Well, let's go ahead and get her identified so we can begin a night surface attack.
Yes, sir. Ahead 1/3.
Alright, so she's got those distinctive squared off double forward and aft masts and a large central funnel. So sort of looks like this right here, medium modern split freighter. Call her that, at least for now, until we see something otherwise. And actually it does look like she's heading towards us. So we'll set 45 degrees on the angle. And let's change course 45 degrees to our right to tee up that intercept. We'll get right perpendicular to her course.
Yes, sir. New course. 3-1-3. Yes, sir.
Alright, yeah, so she's showing at 6,000 yards, so right at 3 miles. So I actually estimated that quite well. We were actually passing her by the time we spotted her. We're actually in front of her slightly, so turning and slowing our speed will get us into better position. Alright, we've got our course all estimated out here. She's heading up to the northwest, doing 8 knots, I'm estimating. I did a speed check on her. And I've estimated her course at 295, which is what we are currently doing at the moment. We've been paralleling her. So, we've got a 1,500 yard intercept circle marked out, so I'm going to head due west and start closing in that angle, and we'll let the distance start to get a little bit closer. I went wide right out up to the north to try to put some distance between us so that she doesn't see us. So you can see that's why we're out to 6,800 yards now. But now we'll start to come back in, and we'll readjust this course here. It's essentially the same. She's still going up this way, so maybe a little less than 295 now, maybe like 293 or so. Alright, let's pop back into the recognition manual real quick because I want to take a look at something here. So, on the medium modern split freighter, the draft is 21 feet. So, that's, of course, the depth of the keel under the water. So I'm going to do a 3 torpedo spread at this target. I'm going to set all 3 torpedoes right at 21 feet. So right at the level of the keel. And I'm doing this because I want to demonstrate something. During the early days of World War II, U.S. sub-skippers were ordered to use their magnetic detonators on their Mark 14 torpedoes. The idea being to run the torpedo underneath the ship. The detonator would be influenced by the magnetic field around the target, causing an explosion underneath the ship, vaporizing the water, creating an air pocket, which could potentially break the back of the ship and cause it to split in two or collapse in on itself. So, an area of effect explosion doing more damage in effect than a direct hit. More realistically, we'd probably set those torpedoes a few feet deeper, maybe 5 or even 10 feet under the keel, but I think for this demonstration, putting it right there at 21 feet is actually going to still work just fine. I have a hunch. Even at that depth, these torpedoes won't let me down in helping me to demonstrate a few things here. This is a demonstration that I actually wanted to do at the beginning of this patrol as a way to segue into talking about the history of U.S. torpedoes and their various problems and then later solutions. But things got so out of hand right out of the gate, and we had so many targets that I didn't want to lose. I opted to not waste torpedoes by doing this. But now this is perfect. We've got a single unescorted ship. It's nighttime. This will be a surface attack. They don't know that we're here. And we can fire a couple of torpedoes and we'll see what happens. And then if we have to fire more, we've got a whole bank. We have a fresh load of torpedoes on board. I don't feel bad with expending a few at this point based on our success that we've had so far. Alright, so she is showing 6,800 yards.
Yes, sir.
We have come around, we're rudder amidships. We've now teed up her course for perpendicular torpedo shot, so we'll drop down to 1/3. We're currently plowing ahead at 13 knots. And I do want to slow down. I don't want her to see our bow wake so that she remains on course and we can make this attack. You can see behind us there we've got a smiling moon just coming up over the horizon, illuminating this whole section of the ocean. But luckily, we are down moon from her, so we should still be in a pretty dark area of the ocean.
Yes, sir.
So there's a 3,000 yard circle. We don't want to get too close, I think, even at night on the surface here, because I don't want to be spotted, but with these longer range torpedoes that we have now in the Porpoise class, I think a 3,000 yard shot is still pretty accurate, pretty simple to make, so I think anywhere inside that I think will be good for this, for the torpedo spread. So we'll just square up our intercept angle here. We'll drop it down to 1/3 as we come out of the turn. And let's reacquire the target. Where is she? There she is. I think the dark night, the rough weather, and I think there's some other factors that affect this as well, but the TDC is not holding the target designation like it should be, as well as unlocking the target, but oh my god, it won't stop doing it. We had this problem in the other mission too, just something about the rough seas make it very difficult. I think, ironically, the video game mechanic of having to lock onto the target to feed the TDC all the correct information, which arguably makes targeting solution way easier in the game than it might be in real life, almost has an opposite effect when you're in these bad weather situations, because then you can't get the correct readings to the TDC and you're clicking buttons sometimes when you think that the crosshairs are locked on and they're not, and it gives the computer, the torpedo computer, some spurious readings sometimes, and it can actually completely mess up your torpedo shot. I think in situations like this, in real life it might have been actually slightly easier, or at least less frustrating, you know, to be able to take the readings on the ships and get them manually inputted into the computer. I don't know, maybe not. It's probably a bunch of other factors that made it just as hard or harder, like trying to actually see the targets through darkness or bad weather. It's probably all evened out. Floating on the surface now, just lying in wait. Engines are secured, almost no way on the ship. We're just being a hole in the ocean here, waiting for the ship, for the enemy merchant to just travel right across our bow tubes. And in fact, I can actually see her with the naked eye, both her smoke and her profile. Of course, we can see her really well through the binoculars, but she is getting awfully close. Still at about a 45-degree angle on bow. Plot officer estimating 8 knots, which agrees with my own calculations, bearing or course of 298. Torpedo tubes coming open. Will set 1 degree left spread for torpedo 1. It's a pretty narrow spread, but she's also going to be quite close, and she is non-maneuvering. This should be a very easy shot. We're going to fire a 2 torpedo spread, 1 degree on either side of center. Then we're going to hold the 3rd torpedo in reserve for a 0 gyro shot. But I just want to fire the 2 first, and then we'll follow up with number 3 if we have to. Yeah, we're about 2,100 yards away from her track. There we go. So there's a 2,000 yard circle. So we'll just drift slowly right into that, just about the time that she's coming into it. She's still outside of it, though. We have a few more minutes to go of just waiting. As long as she keeps plowing on ahead and doesn't see us, which, again, no bow wake. We're not down moon or up moon. So our profile shouldn't be given away. So the only thing might be is if that moonlight, it reflects off the side of the submarine that is facing her. She maybe would see a reflection, but the ocean is so dark right now. I'm just going to roll the dice and hope that that's not the case.
Yes, sir. Current speed 2. Yes, sir.
Son of a bitch! You can see the freaking computer lost the designation again. Come on, there we go. And it will not stay locked. So, you know, I was saying this was an easy shot. This should be very easy to get the solution, but the environmental factors are causing it to be sort of difficult. More difficult than it should be, I guess is what I'm trying to say. She's down to 2,700 yards now.
Yes, sir. Ahead 1/3. Yes, sir.
She's just off the nose. Just off to the left there. So we're up to 1/3. We'll get into firing speed and position here, nice and slow. But she's about to be perpendicular with the torpedo track, so it's going to be time to fire here in just a moment. Down to 1,700 yards. The crosshairs will not stay locked on her. Alright, let's get one more bearing. Come on. Just stay locked for 5 seconds. Son of a bitch, it did it again. Come on! As she's coming perpendicular with us. Alright, you know what? Good enough. Fire one! First torpedo is away 1 degree on right of center, and we'll fire 3.
Torpedo in a 1. Yes, sir. All stop. Torpedo in the water.
Back down to all stop with the 2 torpedoes away. Look at that. I mean, you can see the ship. We could almost spit on her from here. She's this close. We're completely perpendicular. She's not maneuvering. This should be a 100% easy shot, shooting fish in a barrel. How could we possibly miss? I did notice that we don't have an estimated time of impact because when we fired the torpedoes, the ship was not locked on. So here comes number 2. Let's open tube 2. This is going to be right down the chute, 0 degree offset angle. We'll try to keep it locked up as we fire this time, and it went away again, so relock. Fire 2. And it unlocked just as we fired yet again. So we have 3 torpedoes going out. But again, regardless of whether it says it on the stopwatch, look at that. I mean, right off the nose, how could we possibly miss? And yet, we have not had any reports of hits from the first 2 torpedoes, which probably should have been there by now. Still no impacts. We're waiting. I think at least number 3. I mean, she's so close. And yet, it seems that somehow, after all that work, and all that time, and good planning, and a good solution, the torpedoes have just disappeared off into the night. And this is the thing that I wanted to demonstrate, because this is what had sub-skippers throwing their hat on the decks and jumping up and down on it out of frustration, because hours would be spent maneuvering, getting out in front of convoys, evading planes, evading escorts, all this hard work, putting their life on the lines, to then have a sweet shot like this, and to fire, and to not hear from those torpedoes again. Not duds, they don't bounce off the hull, that just nothing happens. When you're shooting on calculations like this, you know, you don't have a computer or like a game, a video game auto-aiming for you. You're never 100% sure that you have a good solution. You're pretty sure. And yet, here we go. We've just been told that our 2 first torpedoes have officially missed. So that means that while we were, you know, fairly certain of that, now their official runtime has expired. So they have sunk to the bottom of the ocean and exploded. And number 3 still never impacted. So what is going on there? Well, basically American torpedoes at this point were extremely problematic. And we're going to get into it as we come around parallel with this ship to make some real shots now. We're going to get into it in detail later on in the mission. We'll do a deep dive on the history of the U.S. torpedoes. But essentially, they couldn't be trusted to hold depth. They typically ran anywhere 10 to 15 feet deeper than where you set them. So we set right at the keel level, 21 feet. It would seem that either the magnetic detonators didn't work, which they also almost never did. It's probable that if they ran 10 feet or 15 feet deeper than the keel, then the magnetic field might not even have been strong enough to trip the detonators. So a series of problems. Now we're on the surface here. This ship is still fat, dumb, and happy, and she seems to have not even noticed that she was fired upon. You wouldn't have this sort of luxury in the daytime in a submerged attack around a heavily escorted convoy. You would have fired your spread, and that's it. Now you're getting depth charged, possibly killed, because your torpedoes didn't work in what otherwise would have been a 100% guaranteed attack run. So this is the frustration and the anger demonstrated just a little bit here that the subsailors would have felt at the time. To be let down by their equipment is the worst feeling in the world, because they've trained hard, they're experts in their field, they're trying their damnedest. You know, you may have a good skipper who's aggressive and is knowledgeable and gets you into perfect firing position, and then the fish go out and they just don't work. So what do you do about that? Well, you could do a couple of things. You could disable the magnetic detonators on board, which was expressly against written orders, and therefore you could lose your command over. Or you set the torpedoes super shallow, and you let them impact the ship, and then even if they do run deep, then you potentially get a magnetic explosion even if it goes underneath the ship. And that's what most skippers started to do within a few months of the war. Even though that was counter to doctrine, it wasn't expressly forbidden like disabling the detonators were. So a lot of guys started to do that as a workaround until much later, when the torpedoes were finally corrected. So back to the attack at hand here. Well, our little Japanese friend here has finally figured out that something's up. It's possible that they actually have seen us now, but she's zigzagging left and right. Maybe actually it was the third torpedo. They might have actually spotted the wake. And we've got aft torpedoes going out, letting the torpedoes come around 90 degrees, and she is right there again, still within spitting distance.
All stop. Yes, sir.
Well, no time on the stopwatch still, so we're just going to wait. Oh, and we've got a dud. So the first one hit, but it did not detonate. And there's number two. Look at that. Middle of target. Huge plume of smoke, and she's on fire. So the first one was actually our first dud of the whole war so far, which is actually pretty surprising. Maybe because we started with the Mark 10s, they were a little more reliable. Oh, there was the explosion, the end of run explosion from the dud as it sank down out of sight. So our first dud, and wouldn't you know it, the second torpedo was completely spot on. So that means that our solution was spot on, and probably has been the whole time. Those other torpedoes just ran under the ship and never detonated.
Yes, sir. Hard to port.
So anyways, enough of the demonstration stuff. Now we're in it. Now we've got a wounded animal. She's burning like crazy. Let's call up the deck gun crew.
Ahead 1/3.
We're done wasting torpedoes on this thing. Let's finish it off with the old deck gun. So she's at 11, I guess like 1,200 yards of range. So let's head up to the deck gun. And then we can input that into our rangefinder and start lighting her up. There's 1,200. Rounds away. And it's a solid hit, maybe a little high on the after deck near the rear hatch. I want to target the forward and aft cargo hatches. Let's see if we can set them on fire with these high explosive rounds. Oh, right through the wave. Okay, that one hit a little bit lower. We're down to, we're at 1,000 yards.
Yes,
pulling it back now to about
All
800.
stop. Yes, sir.
Aim for the center of that hold right there around the masts. There we go. That's a good hit. She's on fire. Whatever she's carrying back there is now burning. So we'll move on to the forward hatch. Waiting for the reload. Here it comes. Ram it home. Let her go. Oh, and a good waterline hit up forward as well. And now forward hatch is burning as well. Hell yeah. We're going to have to stay on manual control here with the deck gun because the crew keeps losing the ship in the darkness, so the AI won't stay locked onto the ship to fire the deck gun. So we got to do it ourselves, at least for the moment. Maybe if we get a little bit closer. Ooh, that was a good underwater hit. You get the splash and then you get the detonation underneath the water level. And that's the hits that we want, because that's what promotes flooding after you make the hole. Ooh, another good one. We're just going to keep raking her forward and aft.
Yes,
Keep those fires burning.
Yes, sir.
She's already taken a torpedo hit, remember, so we don't have to sink her completely with rounds. Hopefully these are just finishing her off.
Yes, sir. Rudder. Yes, sir.
Targeting the superstructure now. Probably not a very nice thing to do, but this is real life. Oh, good hit on the main bridge, the lower level of the two. At this point, nobody should be left up there anyways, and if they are, then we're just encouraging them to abandon ship. Ooh, hit in between the two decks on the forward face of the superstructure. Can we get one right through a window? That should encourage anyone left up there to leave. Wait for the wave to pass. Ooh, a little bit underwater. Come on, clear up. Round away. Ah, a bit low and aft that time. Wait for the wave to clear again. There we go. Oh, yes! Right through the window! Detonated right in the middle of the upper bridge. Ooh, big explosion from the funnel. I've always been curious what the in-game effects of targeting the superstructure are, because you can tell the AI to do it. And I've always wondered, what is the actual benefit of that? I've never really been sure, and now with the mod, you know, who knows if it even has any effect anymore, but does it affect command of the ship? You know, if you hit the bridge, does it just go out of control? Ooh, that's a good hit. Secondary explosions up forward again. And lighting the aft hatch on fire. Just continuing to whale this thing. .5:30 in the morning now. We've put 36 rounds into this merchant ship, plus the one torpedo. I'm going to secure the deck gun at this point because she is going down. Decks are awash. She's rolling to a stop. And just as the sun is starting to come up, the moon high in the sky already, but we've got that gray pre-dawn wolf's tail light. She slips under the waves, and we've got another kill. There we go, 540. She's going down. Add another one to the tally for this patrol.
Yes, sir.
She's ass up.
Returning to course.
Returning to
Yes,
course,
sir.
back up to
Current
cruise speed.
10. Yes, sir.
We'll come around, continue on our way up to the Java Sea. It's March 15th, 1942. We left port on February 27th, so it's been 16 days. We've been out to sea for essentially 2 weeks, and this merchant makes our 4th kill of the patrol, and crazily enough is actually our smallest at 3,200 tons, given that our other 3 ships were all Japanese heavy cruisers. It's March 18th now, and all of our assigned objectives are officially complete. And also, just now, we've finally gotten this message: effective immediately, shift base of operations to Freemantle, Australia. And I feel like we've known that for about a week and a half already. But, here's our 4 kills. I've got a course laid in to head back out of the area, back to Freemantle, Australia. And here we actually have a report of a ship. That was at 11 o'clock, so it was only about 40 minutes ago. So you know what? Just as we're starting to depart the area, we do have one final opportunity at a ship, so why not take it? So bringing the nose around, let's head up into that area and we'll take a peek around and see if we can find where this Japanese ship is.
Contact.
All right, we've got a light-screwed merchant
Bearing 30.
off our port bow. It's just after 2:30 in the afternoon, 14:37. Heavy seas, but at least it's daylight out. So we could, well, in theory, be able to see fairly easily, although the waves are making it very difficult.
Surface.
Up to the surface. It doesn't look like wherever the ship is, they're close enough to see us anyway, so we might as well come up so that we can get some visibility and figure out where this thing is, you know? Up on top now, diesel engines kicking over, pushing us around to the west. Here is this, that was our last sonar contact. Almost due west out from us, and based on that report that we got, heading south, slightly southwest. So here's Mark 1, so from up there to where we have discovered her here, she's moved decently far. So we'll keep coming around. We'll head southwest at flank speed and move to intercept, and hopefully we'll see her on the horizon soon. Looking for masts or smoke out over the horizon. Still nothing yet. It's been about 30 minutes now. We're just after 3 o'clock. There we go. It's about 3:30, just before 3:30, and we've finally spotted her, so here's Mark 2. Where's she at? There she is. Alright, looks like... oh, interesting. Looks like we've got an aft stack. There's only a few kinds of ships that actually have that, with the stack behind the masts. Let's take a look at that in a second, but we'll come around now. It is daytime, so there is a potential that she could see us pretty far off. Here's what I think we're looking at. I think we have a medium old tanker here. We've got the squared off double masts, the superstructure up forward, and the skinny stack out aft. So that's exciting. We'll make a run on a tanker and put a dent into Japan's petroleum importing business, which is one of the really important things to deny them. Setting up the torpedoes now. She has a draft of 23, almost 24 feet. So here I am setting 3 torpedoes to run at high speed at 13 feet. So about 10 feet above the keel, which is normally what I like to do, 10 or 12 feet. So that should smack right in between the keel and the waterline, doing maximum damage. And of course it's a tanker, so if we can spark an explosion, she could just vaporize, which would be fun. Okay, here she comes now. 4 o'clock, we've been paralleling her course. So far, she has not seen us. But we've got all sorts of calculations here. I'm going to come up on this spot that I've marked ahead of us and turn in on the perpendicular course and head towards that intercept circle. And should be arriving just before or at around the same time as she does, as she's entering from the northeast. Nice clear day, but luckily we've got this low profile, you know, in the submarine, and so she still has not spotted us now. We're coming up on 4:30, so we've been pursuing this thing for a couple of hours. I guess 5.5 hours, considering when we got that report at 11 o'clock. But we're closing in now. We are on the intercept path, still on the surface for the moment, but I think I'm about to take us below. Japanese tanker, still none the wiser. We got plenty of depth underneath our own keel, so here we go down to 80 feet. Let's get under the waves, get out of sight before she spots us, because so far, we've been doing good.
Dive, dive.
And as we're calling away battle stations, I'm setting my attack party up, moving the 2 watch officers into their TDC and plot positions that I normally put them in, getting everybody in position for our normal attack setup as we come down to 80 feet.
Current depth 60.
We're just waiting now. Target still long range, 60 degrees off the bow.
Contact! Merchant! Closing! Bearing! 5-8. Long range!
Out at 7,000 yards. We're doing 5 knots submerged, which is pretty fast. Just slowly moving into position, waiting for that tanker to come to us. scope is coming up now as the target is crossing under 3,500 yards. Awfully close. There she is. Right on target. Right on track. I want to take a couple of readings and then get the scope back down. The problem with this heavy weather, of course, with these big waves, is that it's very difficult to see and get good readings, and so sometimes you have to nudge the boat up a few feet, and the more you do that, the higher your periscope sits out, and even in the troughs of the waves, the entire superstructure can be outside and very visible. Which is obviously something that you don't want. If they spot the sub, then your attack is ruined, but at the same time, you also can't make the attack if you can't see them, so you gotta find that compromise. Like here, I can see the tops of the masts. Oh, there it was. Ah, I saw the waterline for just a second. I need like 3 seconds of clear waterline. Let's see if we can get it. The tops of these.
Yes,
oh, right there.
All stop.
Yeah, I think we got it. Okay, so confirm 3730. Back down to 80 feet, and the scope comes back down. We'll duck back under the waves and clear any of the weather decks so they're not visible. And she is about there, following the same track. Just after 5 o'clock now. She's 45 degrees, angle on bow, 1,500 yards, or just under 16, I guess. And she is within the intercept circle. We are just holding here at 0 knots, just waiting for her to come right in front of us again. Readjust her course just a little bit, but we are basically in firing position, ready to let loose with a couple of torpedoes. They're estimating 7 knots and a course of 218, which is fairly close to what I estimated myself. Actually, let's just put this right up to 218. No, a little bit more. There we go. Nope, too far. There we go. So just under 220. And the computer says that she's at 30 degrees off to starboard. Which she is, so that's good. You can tell that your firing solution is good when your observations match what the TDC is calculating. Okay, final bearing, 1,300 yards. Gyros are set up. Begin firing.
Firing tube 1.
1 is away.
Firing
There
tube
goes
2.
2.
Torpedo in the water.
Switching to tube 3, we'll go 2 degrees to the right.
Torpedo in the water.
And there goes number 3. Full spread is away.
Torpedo in the water.
About 15 seconds to impact. Here they come. Probably just seeing the wakes right now. Too late to do anything about it. Yes, impact 1. Here comes number 2. Ooh, good hit. Good hit just aft of center. So 1 forward of center, 1 just aft. It looks like number 3, just passing right behind the fantail. But that's okay. 2 out of 3, that's why I fire the spreads. I don't mind doing it. You lose a torpedo here and there, but
Yes, sir.
increase your chances of getting hits. And we have gotten 2 hits on this tanker, and she is now on fire. That petroleum or fuel or gasoline inside of her now igniting. Fire spreading to the forward hold now. I think she's going to go down. We just need to wait her out. Another victim down to Davy Jones' locker.
Tube 1 ready, sir.
Handful of survivors off our port side in a single boat. We'll leave them unmolested this time to make their own way. I am very pleased with this patrol, and I think it's time we start heading back for Australia. Today, we tackle the enormous subject that is central to the story of U.S. submarines in World War II, torpedo failures. It's often glossed over that the Germans and British dealt with similar problems in the early years of the war, and in fact, the Germans even gave it a name, referring to it as the torpedo crisis, because it was so bad. But it's the American submarines that are most associated with faulty torpedoes, likely because of the enormous internal resistance to fixing the problems or even acknowledging that the equipment was faulty. The bureaucratic shirking of responsibility by a semi-independent department within the government, the Bureau of Ordnance, is infuriating to read about even today. But let's start at the beginning and talk about the introduction of torpedo warfare in the 19th century. The history of the modern torpedo, as we think of it, begins all the way back in 1866. The word torpedo originally referred to stationary naval mines, and comes from the torpedo fish, a kind of ray that uses an electric shock to stun its prey. In 1866, Robert Whitehead, a British engineer working under contract for the Austrian Navy, developed the first self-propelled, self-stabilizing torpedo, which was referred to as the Whitehead torpedo. It was propelled by compressed air up to 7 knots and had a range of 700 yards. Later, Whitehead increased the speed of his torpedo to 17 knots and incorporated a gyroscope, newly invented by Austrian Ludwig Aubry, to hold its course. From his factory in Croatia, Whitehead began torpedo sales to most of the world's navies. The United States Navy tried its own hand at torpedoes at first, introducing the Howell torpedo to limited surface ship service in 1895. The Howell was smaller and cheaper than the Whitehead, left no wake, and held a straighter course. However, design and production difficulties led to only 50 torpedoes being constructed, and they were pulled from service in 1903. Instead, the Navy turned to Whitehead torpedoes. Patent rights to the torpedo and a license to build them in the U.S. were purchased in 1891, and the Navy awarded the contract to the E.W. Bliss Company of Brooklyn, New York. The Bliss Whitehead torpedoes were in service by 1894, and Bliss offered both long and short versions of the torpedo at 17 feet and 11.5 feet. Beginning in 1900, the Whitehead Mark III became the first U.S. submarine torpedo, as the first plunger, or later A-class, subs were rolling out of the yards at this time. The Mark IIIs were used in the A-class through the D-class submarines, and were short surface torpedoes adapted for subuse. In 1904, the Bliss Company introduced a new internally designed torpedo by engineer F. M. Leavitt. The new Bliss Leavitt torpedoes increased range over 4 times of that of the Whiteheads, reaching 4,000 yards at 27 knots. They were designated Torpedo Mark I, starting a new naming convention separate from the Whitehead lines. Initially used on surface ships, the Leavitt Mark IV became the first U.S. torpedo designed from the outset for submarine use, and began service in 1912 on C and D class submarines. By World War I, Bliss Leavitt Mark 9 and 10 torpedoes were in submarine service, with the Mark 10s still in service with the S-boats during World War II. The Mark 9 was the final torpedoes built by Bliss, as the Navy took over direct production at the Torpedo Naval Station in Newport, Rhode Island. The Newport Torpedo Station was built in 1869, where the Navy developed the smokeless powder used in naval artillery in both World Wars. In 1907, a new factory was built to manufacture torpedoes, eventually ending the Bliss Company's contract with the weapons in the mid-1920s. Navy torpedoes were now being built in-house, and Newport oversaw their design and testing, and this is where trouble began to start in the U.S. submarine torpedo scandal of World War II. It was the Mark 14 torpedo that was at the heart of all the trouble. In the first full year of the war, U.S. submarines fired 1,442 torpedoes, sinking only 109 ships, an abysmal 13% kill ratio. Crews with perfect firing solutions would be rewarded with misses, duds, and premature detonations, often revealing the sub's presence and subjecting them to battering depth charge attacks. The Bureau of Ordnance, which had been in charge of developing the Mark 14, blamed submarine crews and their captains for operating the weapons incorrectly, but in fact, both the torpedo and the detonator had major faults. As problems continued through 1942, Rear Admiral Charles Lockwood, commanding all Pacific submarines from Freemantle, Australia, took it upon himself to order field tests. Lockwood's tests showed torpedoes running anywhere from 8 to 15 feet deeper than set. While Buord initially refused to believe Lockwood, further tests forced them to admit that the Mark 14s had a 12 to 15 foot variance in depth. Taking no chances, sub-captains began setting a depth of 0 on attacks, but they were still plagued with premature explosions and duds because the Mark 6 exploder was also flawed. By the end of World War I, warships were beginning to employ anti-torpedo defenses, like torpedo blisters and torpedo belts. These used water tanks and armor to minimize torpedo damage. Tests immediately following World War I concluded that Mark 10 torpedoes were incapable of disabling a capital ship with these defenses. That's why it was decided that torpedoes would be more effective exploding under the keel of a ship where there was no armor. In addition to direct damage, the explosion would vaporize a volume of water and create a low-pressure pocket that could break the keel of the ship. In theory, a single torpedo from a lowly submarine could break the back of the mightiest battleship. Inspired by German magnetic mines of World War I, the Bureau of Ordnance assigned the task of developing a magnetic exploder to Newport Torpedo Station. Project G-53, as it was called, was developed behind the tightest veil of secrecy the Navy had ever created. Buord feared that if enemy navies, especially Japan, knew the secrets of the American magnetic pistol, they could design their ships to defeat it. But Buord's security went overboard, only adding to the problems of the torpedoes because very few knew exactly how they were supposed to work. A service manual for the exploder was written, but for security reasons was locked in a safe and not printed. Only commanding officers and torpedo officers were allowed access to the manual and the weapon. When Mark 14 torpedoes, with Mark 6 detonators, finally began to be distributed to the fleet in April of 1941, it was grudgingly realized that enlisted torpedo men needed access as well in order to maintain and service the weapons. Even so, when war broke out only 7 months later, few men in the Pacific Theater understood the inner workings of the detonator, and fewer still could recognize a malfunction. The Mark 14 was designed in 1930, and the Mark 6 detonator had been developed in the 20s, but no one was aware of these problems because budget restrictions and secrecy led to the detonator being live-fire tested only once in 1926. 2 live torpedoes were fired at a stationary target, the submarine L-8, in Narragansett Bay. 1 torpedo ran under the target and failed to explode, while the second detonated successfully. All of Buord's confidence, and their reluctance to believe later submarine crews, was essentially based on a 50% success rate of these 2 real live-fire shots. All other tests of the Mark 14 torpedo were without the top-secret detonator attached or activated. They were fired from barges instead of real submarines, and testing always occurred in gentle, shallow water. During test firings, torpedoes with dummy warheads were run under the target, where it was assumed that the magnetic detonator would fire. This assumption and trust in the detonator meant that these test firings were concealing not only the detonator's problems, but also the depth-keeping problems of the torpedo itself. Thanks to Admiral Lockwood's field testing in Australia, by August 1942 the faulty depth mechanism had been isolated and corrected, and torpedoes were now striking more targets. Unfortunately, this only revealed more problems as the number of duds and premature explosions went up. Angry and frustrated crews zeroed in on the detonator, trying to convince the Bureau of Ordnance that it was at fault. Admiral Lockwood, now relocated to Pearl Harbor to command all Central Pacific submarines, was reluctant to deactivate the magnetic detonators as he felt that there was still a tactical advantage. However, he finally ordered their deactivation in July 1943. An important study had just come out, compiled by the Bureau of Ships. It revealed, based on Atlantic convoy sinkings through the war, broadside hits were actually more effective than under-the-keel hits against merchantmen, which lacked the armor and compartmentation of warships. It was also finally realized that the Earth's magnetic field where the detonators were calibrated was different than in the Pacific combat zones, which was the cause of both premature detonations and lack of detonations. Both the British and Germans had realized this mid-1941, and had both deactivated their magnetic detonators well before the Americans even joined the war. But now, it was finally clear to the US Navy as well that the magnetic detonator was more of a liability than an asset, and Lockwood ordered his submarines to fire for contact hits only. That same morning, July 24th, the submarine USS Tenosa, acting on those orders, fired 15 torpedoes into a single freighter with only 2 detonations, failing to sink the target. The captain saved his 16th and final torpedo, bringing it back to Pearl Harbor for inspection. Lockwood once again conducted his own experiments locally, firing torpedoes into cliff sides and dropping them from cranes onto steel plates. Here it was discovered that the contact firing pin was also faulty, and would deform without firing the primer caps when striking a target at a perfect 90 degrees. Further tests showed that more obtuse angles produced better results, and Lockwood sent out an interim order immediately for captains to hit targets at an angle, avoiding at all costs the textbook 90-degree angle track. Meanwhile, the torpedo shops at Pearl Harbor began field modifying the torpedo firing pins, increasing their success rate from 30% to 90%. As historian Clay Blair Jr. writes, after 21 months of war, the 3 major defects of the Mark 14 torpedo had at last been isolated. Each defect had been discovered and fixed in the field, always over the stubborn opposition of the Bureau of Ordnance. Author Douglas Shireman writes that the Bureau of Ordnance and the Newport Torpedo Station were flat out guilty of designing and issuing an entire generation of faulty torpedoes. Both organizations proved incapable of making the transition from peacetime apathy and budget constraints to wartime demand and accepting incriminating combat evidence suggesting major ordnance flaws. Their blind faith and anemic testing may have saved money and material before the war, but it certainly cost lives during the war. It's March 26, 1942, as we're coming down the west coast of Australia towards Fremantle. This means we've been out to sea for 28 days, an entire month patrol, having left port on February 27th, up out of Java. In fact, this is our first time coming to Fremantle, which is now going to be our home base, our home port. A month-long patrol may not seem too bad, but let's keep this in perspective. The war's only been going on for 4 months, so we have spent 25% of that in this one patrol so far, so that is pretty significant. And we got some pretty monumental sinkings out of this one, which as we pull into our berth here in Fremantle in just a moment, we're going to review our tonnage numbers real quick and see what sort of reception we're going to get from Admiral Lockwood and the command here in Fremantle.
Yes, sir. All stop. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Back standard. Yes, sir. All stop. Yes, sir.
So here we go. Here is our mission summary as we're pulling dockside, throwing the mooring lines out. We left port on February 27th, 1942. We've completed all of our objectives. We went to the Baween Island, Karamata Strait, and the Makassar Strait, and we sunk 5 ships. 2 of those regular merchant ships, but 3 warships we took down for a total tonnage of 45,566 tons. That's because those 3 warships were all heavy cruisers, which is an extremely notable event. We have done our part to reduce Japanese naval presence in the area, so I'm pretty proud of that. Surely we must be getting a medal for this. I can't imagine that we would go away empty-handed from a haul like this. So let's see what happens as we move on to the next screen. And yes, we're being presented with the Bronze Star. Not too bad. Signed March 28, 42, President of the United States takes pleasure in presenting the Bronze Star to Jim Stavridis, Lieutenant Commander, United States Navy, for gallantry and intrepidity and distinguished service in the line of his profession as commanding officer of the USS Pickerel. The notable successes of Lieutenant Commander Jim Stavridis and his command against a ruthless and formidable enemy enhance and sustain the high traditions of the United States Naval Service. So there we go, coming back to port with a cool 43,000 tons, 45,000 tons, a Bronze Star, and some pretty wicked stories to tell. Very, very pleased with this patrol. So let's wrap it up here, and next time we'll be setting out on a brand new patrol. We'll see you then. Come back next time.